Assalamu alaikum and good day everyone. We are the Group 7, the first reporters in the finals term. Today, we'll be discussing Chapter 13, Power and Politics, and Chapter 14, Conflict and Negotiation in the subject Human Behavior in Organization. In every organization, whether it is a company, a school, or even a student organization, people influence each other in different ways. Sometimes influence comes from authority, sometimes it comes from knowledge, and sometimes it comes from relationships or personality. In this chapter, I'll be discussing or we'll be learning about what power is, the sources of power, the different power tactics people use, and the directions of influence inside an organization. Understanding these concepts helps us understand how people influence decisions and behaviors in workplaces and organizations. First off, what is power? Power is defined as the ability of one person to influence another person's behavior. In simple words, power means getting someone to do something because of your influence. But one important idea in power is dependence. Dependence means someone needs something that another person controls. Take for example, if a student needs approval from a teacher to pass a requirement, the teacher has the power because the student depends on them. You see? Another example in business, if a company depends on one supplier for an important material, the supplier has power over the company. So the main idea is power exists when others depend on you. Leadership versus power. Power and leadership are related, but they are not exactly the same. Leadership focuses on guiding people towards a common goal. For example, a leader motivating a team to finish a project successfully. Power, on the other hand, is broader. Power can influence people in many directions, not only from leader to follower. Another difference is that leadership usually requires shared goals between the leader and the follower. But power does not require shared goals. A person can still influence others even if their goals are different, as long as there is dependence. Next, we'll be talking about sources of power. Power in organizations usually comes from two main sources. Now, let us talk about formal power. Formal power comes from a person's official position in an organization. There are usually three types of formal power. We have coercive power, reward power, and legitimate power. These types of power are based on authority and control within the organization. For example, a supervisor may assign tasks, evaluate employees, or decide on rewards and punishments. Because of their position, employees are expected to follow their instructions. Okay, now let's talk about the first type of formal power, which is coercive power. This power is based on fear of punishment. People follow instructions because they want to avoid negative consequences. For example, a manager may suspend an employee for violating company rules. The second type is reward power. This happens when someone can give rewards to others. Rewards can include bonuses, promotions, incentives, or recognition. For example, a supervisor may give a bonus to an employee who exceeds their performance targets. The third is legitimate power. This comes from a person's official authority or position in the organization. For example, a department head assigning tasks to employees because it is part of their responsibility. Personal power. Personal power comes from a person's individual's qualities, skills, or relationships and not from their positions. There are two types of personal power. First is expert power. Expert power comes from special knowledge, expertise, or skills. For example, in a company, a senior engineer may influence decisions because they understand the technical aspects better than others. The second type is referent power. Referent power happens when people admire, respect, or look up to someone. Because of that respect, others are more willing to follow their influence. For example, a team leader who is respected because of their good leadership, fairness, and character. Now, which power is more effective? Studies show that personal power is often more effective than formal power. This means expert power and referent power usually produce better results. Now you may ask, why? Because people follow voluntarily, not because they are forced. On the other hand, coercive power can sometimes create negative reactions. Employees may feel stressed, unhappy, or less motivated if they are constantly threatened with punishment. So, in many organizations, leaders who rely on knowledge, respect, and influence tend to be more successful. Dependence is the key to power. As mentioned earlier, dependence is the key to power. The more people depend on you, the more power you have. For example, if a company depends on one supplier for a critical product, the supplier gains strong bargaining power. Another example is financial independence. If someone earns their own income and support themselves, they become less dependent on others. Because of this, other people have less control over them. So again, power is not just about position, it is about who depends on whom. What creates dependence? Dependence becomes stronger when three things exist. First is importance. If something is very important to others, they will depend on the person who controls it. Second is scarcity. If a person is rare or difficult to find, it becomes more valuable. Third is non-substitutability. This means the resource cannot easily be replaced by something else. For example, a rare specialist doctor or an expert engineer has a strong power because of their skills are important, scarce, and difficult to replace. Now, let's move on into power tactics. Power itself does not automatically make people follow you. People also use power tactics, which are strategies used to influence others. There are 9 common power tactics used in organizations. These tactics help people influence their bosses, their co-workers, or their employees. Each tactic works differently depending on the situation. The first power tactic is legitimacy. Legitimacy means influencing others by referring to rules, policies, or official authority. In this tactic, a person tries to convince others by saying that the request is valid because it follows organizational rules or responsibilities. In simple terms, the person is saying, "You should do this because it is part of the rules or part of my authority." For example, a department head might say, as the department head, I am asking everyone to follow the new attendance policy because it is required by the company. In these situations, the influence works because people recognize the authority or the rule being referenced. So the key idea of legitimacy is people follow because the request is supported by rules, policies, or official authority. The next power tactic is rational persuasion. This means using logic, facts, and evidence to convince someone. Instead of forcing someone, you explain why your idea makes sense. For example, an employee might say, based on our results, most customers prefer online payment. If we add a digital payment option, it may increase sales. Because this tactic uses facts and reasoning, it is considered one of the most effective influence tactics. Inspirational appeals. This tactic focuses on emotions, values, and motivation. Instead of using facts, the person tries to inspire others to connect with their beliefs. For example, a leader might say, if we succeed on this project, we can improve our community and create better opportunities for everyone. This tactic works well because it motivates people emotionally. Consultation. Consultation means involving other people in the decision-making process. Instead of simply giving orders, the person asks for ideas, suggestions, or feedbacks. For example, a team leader might say, what do you think is the best approach for this project? This tactic is effective because people feel valued and included, which makes them more willing to support the idea. The next tactic is exchange. Exchange means offering something in return for cooperation. It is kind of similar to trade. Take for example, an employee might say, if you help me finish this report today, I will help you prepare your presentation tomorrow. This tactic works because it creates mutual benefit from both sides. Another tactic is personal appeals. This means asking someone for help based on friendship, loyalty, or personal relationship. For example, a coworker might say, we've worked together for a long time. Can you support me on this project? This tactic works when there is a strong personal relationship between people. Another tactic is ingratiation. This involves using flattery, compliments, or friendliness before making a request. Take for example, you're really good at organizing events. Could you help me plan our company activity? The goal is to make the other person feel appreciated, which may increase the chance that they will agree. Next up is pressure. Pressure is a tactic that uses demands, threats, or warnings. For example, if this task is not completed by today, I will report it to the management. This tactic can sometimes work, but research shows that it is one of the least effective tactics because it may create stress, resistance, or conflict. Lastly, coalitions. Coalitions means getting support from other people to persuade someone. Instead of influencing alone, a person gathers group support. Take for example, several employees may approach a manager together to support a proposal. This tactic can be effective because group support creates stronger influence. Next up, we'll be talking about cultural differences in power tactics. Another important concept in power tactics is cultural differences. Different cultures prefer different ways of influencing people. In individualistic cultures, people usually prefer direct influence tactics. Individualistic cultures focus more on personal goals, independence, and direct communication. Because of this, people in these cultures often use rational persuasions, meaning they rely on facts, logic, and clear arguments to convince others. For example, in countries like the United States, people may directly present data or statistics to convince their boss about a proposal. On the other hand, collectivistic cultures prefer a more indirect influence tactics. Collectivistic cultures value group harmony, relationships, and cooperation. Instead of directly confronting someone, people may use coalitions or group support when influencing decisions. The Philippines is generally considered a collectivistic culture. This means Filipinos often value pakikisama, which means teamwork and maintaining good relationships in the workplace. For example, instead of directly challenging a manager's idea, employees might first talk with coworkers and build support before presenting the idea. So in summary, individualistic cultures prefer direct tactics like rational persuasion, while collectivistic cultures prefer indirect tactics like coalitions and group influence. Understanding cultural differences helps managers choose the most effective way to influence people in different environments. Preferred power tactics by influence directions. Influence inside organizations can move in three directions. First is upward influence. This happens when employees tries to influence their bosses or managers. For example, an employee presenting a proposal to convince management to adopt a new system. The second is downward influence. This occurs when managers influence their employees or subordinates. For example, a supervisor instructing employees to follow new company policies. Third is lateral influence. This happens between co-workers at the same level in the organization. Now, I'll be giving the floor to Mr. Pagaw to talk about what is political skill. I've been Jomar U. Morelos, and thank you for listening.
Good day everyone, so I am Amir Salman Espagaw, and at this very moment I'm gonna walk you through the politics in organization and its related concepts. So first, let's define what is political skill. So basically, ang idea ng political skill is it is the ability to effectively influence others and subtly meet objectives without being labeled as manipulative or yung someone na mahilig mag-control ng kanyang kapwa. Next, we have sexual harassment. So, when we heard the word sexual harassment, pumapasok sa isip natin is yung sexuality, pagkalalaki or pagkababae ng isang tao na kung saan it is being violated or being abused, in which leads to the creation of the hostile work environment. However, there are managerial measures to prevent sexual harassment from occurring. So, first, we have to reassure employees that they will not encounter retaliation if they file a complaint. Next, we also have make sure offenders are disciplined and terminated. We also have investigate every complaint and inform the Legal and Human Resources Department about this issue. We can also set up in-house seminars to raise employees' awareness of sexual harassment issues. And then lastly, we can make sure an active policy defines what constitutes sexual harassment, informs employees that they can be fired for sexually harassing another employee, and establishes procedures for making complaints. Next, we have organizational politics. So, organizational politics daw refers to the system within a company where yung power and influence were being used to manage advantages and disadvantages within a company. While yung political behavior naman on the other hand are the specific activities or actions an individual take that are not part of their formal job requirements or their roles. So there is a question, can an organizations be politics free? To answer that, if you were to relate it to the current situation here in the Philippines, uh, these conditions rarely exist. Bakit? Let's say sa workplace mo, let's talk about yung promotion race. Kung may one seat available or may isang posisyon na available, limited position lamang na kung saan yung boss preferences might be subjective, na kung saan yung politics becomes necessary evil to get things done or para ma-secure yung role na yun. Now, let's move on to the causes and consequences of political behavior. So, yung political behavior daw is encouraged by a mix of individual level and organizational level conditions that influence how power is used to gain advantages or avoid disadvantages. First is individual factors. So, a person's current situation and personal expectations of the company often drives them toward politics. So, ba't nga ba nangyari to? May iba't ibang rason. It can be yung expectation of success, kung saan employees use politics if they believe these actions will directly help them succeed. It can also be high investment. Yung employee daw might use office politics to secure a promotion because they expect long-term benefits from staying in the company. We also have alternate job options. So, ang isang worker daw might be more willing to spread influence or build alliances if they have other job options and are not afraid of risk of being caught or failing. Second and last factors is the organizational factors. So, yung politics increases daw when the rules of the game are unclear or resources are tight. So, for what instances? Let's say limited resources. When there is only one promotion available in a year, competition naturally turns political. Like, it can also be yung subjective evaluation. So, politics are more common when performance evaluations are based on personal opinion rather than measurable outcomes. It can also be yung low trust and high pressure. Like environment with low trust and high performance pressures creates a survival of the fittest mentality for the mga employee. So, ano-ano nga ba ang consequences ng organizational politics? So, it may lead to decrease in job satisfaction, increase in anxiety and stress, increased turnover, and also reduce in the performance of the employees, which affects the overall performance of the organization. Moving on, we have defensive behavior. So, ano nga ba itong defensive behavior? Defensive behavior daw are reactive and protective actions used to avoid action, blame, or change. So, these behaviors daw typically occur when employees feel threatened by political environment or when they perceive that their status or safety is at risk. Defensive behavior daw are composed of avoiding action. So, sa avoiding action, ang mga halimbawa nito is yung overconforming, backpassing, playing dumb, stretching, and even stalling. So, avoiding action, it is to avoid more work or to escape yung responsibility for a task. Second, we have the avoiding blame. So, nakapaloob dito yung buffing, playing safe, justifying, scapegoating, and also misrepresenting. So, ba't nga ba ito nangyayari is it is to protect one's reputation when things go wrong or to minimize the consequences of a mistake. Third and last, we have the avoiding change. So, nakapaloob dito sa avoiding change yung prevention and also yung self-protection. So, ba't nga ba ito nangyayari is para ma-maintain the status quo when an employee feels that new organizational shift will threaten their current position or power. We also have impression management. So, ang impression management is a process individuals use to control how others perceive them and often used to secure promotions or better evaluations. So, there are several common impression management techniques such as yung conformity, excuses, self-promotion, flattery, and also exemplifications, and many more.